In the middle 1930s, archaeologist Emil Haury of Gila Pueblo directed an excavation in southern Arizona at a site called Snaketown. During this work, the crew came upon a large earthen depression that led Haury to conclude that this feature was a ball court, previously found only in Mexico and Central America. It was a discovery that forever changed the course of southwestern archaeology. Dr. David Wilcox of the Museum of Northern Arizona has been studying ball courts since 1979. In his research, he has identified over 200 ball courts in Arizona, ranging from the southern deserts near the U.S.-Mexican border to the edge of the high plateau of northern Arizona.
Ball courts have been known in central Mexico at the culture area we call Mesoamerica for thousands of years. When Europeans first came into the New World, at the time of Columbus, they found ball games being played in the Caribbean. When Cortez landed in Mexico in 1519, they found the Aztecs playing this game in courts that were built of stone. They had a flat playing alley, benches, and a wall with a ring set on either side of the wall. If the ball could be induced to go through the hole in the ring, the game would be won. In that the game represented a mythological drama, a ritual, the players representing the gods, and the belief that the gods would die and then be reborn, hence the players would be sacrificed so that the world could continue to go round.
Throughout the 18 and early 1900s, it was believed that ball courts were associated with cultures that were restricted to the Mesoamerican regions. In addition, up until the 1930s, there was only limited evidence of cultural contact between the peoples of Mexico and southern Arizona.
In southern Arizona in the 19th century, it was known that there were these earthen embankment features, oval features that were called bowls, for lack of a better name, and early workers had shown that they're probably public architecture, places where ritual events took place, rather than, say, reservoirs or something else. It was not, though, until 1935 that an archaeologist named Emil Haury, who at that time was working for the Institute Gila Pueblo, and they were digging a site called Snaketown on the Gila River in southern Arizona, recognized that one of these features, a very large example, where the embankments were fairly parallel, still oval, but quite parallel, and they dug half of it and found two stone markers in the middle of along the long axis. And he'd just been at Harvard University in graduate school and had learned about Mayan courts where they have three markers down the middle of the playing field. And so he said, well, this might be a ball court. If it is, there should be a third marker. And so they put down a test pit where he predicted it to be, and sure enough, there was a stone set in the floor, forming then three markers. So the idea that these were ball courts was hypothesized by Haury at that time, and it was soon recognized that there were many of these features in southern Arizona. The idea that there was a ball court here in southern Arizona, 1,000 or more miles north of the Mayan area or central Mexico, was terrifically exciting at the time. It was the primo point of a series of ideas about the relationship between this archaeology of southern Arizona, which goes by the name of Hohokam, and Mexico. There were ceramic design elements that connected the two areas. There were certain artifacts that connected the two areas, and then this idea that there were ball courts here as well made the case that there was a connection between Mesoamerica and the Southwest, which prior to that people had been quite skeptical about.
The Hohokam inhabited a large part of the Sonoran Desert in southern Arizona, from the early centuries AD up until the 1400s. In order to survive in this difficult land, the Hohokam created an extensive irrigation system and sophisticated farming techniques. The Casa Grande ruins near Coolidge, Arizona, south of Phoenix, is the best-known Hohokam site to the general public. Dating to the later period of Hohokam occupation, they include a 4-story structure called a great house that was surrounded by a large compound. The settlement remains provide a glimpse of the organized society that once existed here.
The Casa Grande is the best preserved example of Hohokam architecture. Built in the 1300s, it stood 4 stories high and is in fact a tower, and holes that were deliberately constructed in the walls worked to observe astronomical events such as the summer solstice and certain moon events. There are 2 other examples of towers like this that we have evidence for, and it's likely there were even more at this same time.
At Casa Grande, a ball court is situated between the Great House and a compound with 2 platform mounds where living quarters of the elite were located. The ball court, however, appears to date to an earlier period than the surrounding Classic period architecture. As Wilcox continued to collect data on the distribution of ball courts in the Hohokam region, he found that there was no central or major court, but rather numerous courts that existed in neighboring villages along the major river drainages. These courts were often built adjacent to large plazas amidst the living quarters and other buildings. During the centuries-long period of ball court use, Wilcox hypothesizes about the prevalence of exchange taking place between the neighboring Hohokam villages in the context of games or other activities taking place in the ball courts.
In approaching the study of these features, I called them Hohokam courts, leaving out the ball part of it, since they were dance courts or ball courts was at issue. And what I argued then first was that they're places of public ritual, public gatherings. We're talking about societies, farming societies, sedentary irrigation societies, villages of perhaps several hundred people who were using these facilities in some public manner. And the first inference is that it's a ritual manner, which is to say that they're places where groups of people came together to discharge ritual obligations to one another. Now, when people around the world do such things, they normally exchange valuables with one another in a formal way. Other kinds of exchange can go on a little more informally on those occasions. And so the idea that these Hohokam courts were ritual features immediately leads to the idea of a ceremonial exchange system involving the network of ball courts throughout the Hohokam region.
The Hohokam ball courts were simple in design and probably fairly easy to build. They were constructed around a large, shallow, oval hole in the ground with the excavated dirt piled up along the sides, making an embankment from which several hundred people could stand and watch. Most of the courts measured 25 to 35 meters long and about 15 meters wide, with a smooth floor that sloped up along the edges. 1 out of 5 were twice this size. Entryways were located at either end of the courts.
This ball court at Pueblo Grande Ruins in Phoenix was excavated in the 1950s by Don Heiser. It's subsequently been restored as an exhibition. It's one of the only completely excavated ball courts in the whole sample of over 200. In the fill of this court, potsherds were found that date to the 1300s, showing that it had been abandoned by then. And in general, the picture we have is that all of these ball courts seem to be gone by 1200 or a little after.
Ball courts were in use in Arizona from about AD 750 to 1200. Wilcox feels he can understand how the ball game may have evolved during this 450-year period. Initially, a whole religious ideology is thought to have revolved around the games, which spread quite rapidly to other neighboring groups. In later periods, the courts continued to be adopted by other cultures. However, the religious meaning associated with the games had changed, and the courts helped bring about new kinds of social connections.
In the 1000s, it appears that ball courts began to spread northward, but now the people that were adopting them did not adopt the Hohokam religion in all of its aspects, but were much more selective about it. And so it seems the ball courts had begun to serve a somewhat different function than they had before, now linking different ethnic groups together as opposed to the people who shared the same cultural values in all their aspects.
Following the eruption of Sunset Crater about 1065, several different groups moved into the northern Arizona locality that is now called Wupatki National Monument. It was here that the northernmost ball court known, and one of the latest built, was excavated in 1965 by Lex Lindsay and the Museum of Northern Arizona. Although shaped like a Hohokam court, it was unusual in that the walls were constructed entirely of stone.
During the excavation of the ball court, we were visited here by a number of people who were up on the Wupatki ruin. They came down to look at what we were doing, and very often the people would ask, what kind of structure is that? What are you doing down here? And I would explain to them that we were excavating a ball court. This structure has most of the features of a Casa Grande ball court. It's interesting that here in northern Arizona we should have this kind of structure, and that made even more the excavation of it even more exciting.
Although it is generally agreed that this feature is a ball court, the Hopi people who claim ancestral ties to the area suggest that it may have been used for many purposes.
What is again called the ball court may again have served in different functions. On one, it could have very well been a social setting where in fact games were played as much as we have that social context today in Hopi. The plaza area, for example, in Hopi is still, and in my lifetime, early time, was a very popular gathering place where ball games were played, follow the leader kinds of games were played. Even men and women joined in certain games, and it was in fact a very a setting for social functions. But as a Hopi, I always rely on our traditions to see a feature like this in a different setting as well. And one of them I know from accounts, what is called the ball court could have very well been a plaza to conduct ceremonies. And this is how a Hopi would look at it. And you know, if you bring in, for example, clans who directly associate with Wupatki per se, they may very well talk about certain ceremonies that they feel were performed in this setting here. The other way that Hopi would always look at these features was again the need to sustain themselves physically. And every clan had a ceremony through which they performed prayer, through which they performed ritual to bring forth, they say, a blessing from nature. And in this case, this feature could very well have also been a ceremonial and ritual cistern, and could have very well been a place where a certain clan brought forth this blessing we call water.
One of the interesting features about this ball court is the high walls, beyond being masonry, is that it has very high walls. So if one can make a case for playing a ball game in here, certainly the highness of these walls would help support that argument.
If a ball game was indeed played in this court, how was it played? There is evidence of a variety of games played in courts similar to this by other cultures. Although no game-related artifacts have been found in northern Arizona, Wilcox still enjoys demonstrating some of the possible variations.
In Mesoamerica, there were many varieties of the game. In West Mexico, for example, hip ball was played with a ball this size, 3.5 kilos of solid rubber played off the hip. Smaller balls also were used off the arm. In the Mayan area, on ceramic vases, we see a ball this size played off large chest protectors. In the Hohokam area, in contrast, a small rubber ball has been found and small stone balls. And there, as here at Wupatki, the game may have then been a stick game or a kick game, and the courts then were designed accordingly.
The pueblo at Wupatki is thought to have had a population of approximately 100 people that lived within a day's foot travel of other villages made up of people of different ethnic backgrounds. Wilcox points out that the location of the ball court indicates a desire on the part of the community to place that feature a safe distance away from the pueblo.
Circular feature, which you see here, which is today called an amphitheater, has a bench. It was probably a ceremonial facility for these southern Cayena people. It had no roof, and thus from the roofs of the pueblos, one could look down and see the ceremonial activities that went on in this facility quite easily. In contrast, the ball court, which is located well away from the pueblo, does not have that same intimate relationship with the pueblo. We thus think of the ball court as a place to entertain strangers, as a place where ceremonial activity could go on that would integrate these people with people not of their own ethnic group.
As different ethnic groups such as the Kayenta Anasazi and Kohonina began to move into the Wupatki area, evidence points to an increase in social tensions between them and their Sinawa neighbors to the south. Skeletal remains of this time suggest a violent death of some individuals, possibly during the course of raids. At a Kohonina site called Juniper Terrace, architectural ruins give another indication of the perceived threats to communities.
Over 60 years ago, the Museum of Northern Arizona excavated here at Juniper Terrace, which is a site located north of the Sinawa area and west of Wupatki. Ceramically, it dates to the same time as Wupatki in the late 1100s, like many sites of this time period, the room blocks here are located on high points, creating a very defensible perimeter to the site. The foundations we see here form a wall that encloses the Juniper Terrace site. Like Kohonina sites west of the peaks that date a century before this, I call this a wall plaza site. In the latter case, those walls are 2.5 to 3 meters high of massive stone, 2 stones wide, whereas here we have only the foundation. But if we imagine a wooden palisade, the same effect would be achieved here in the Juniper Terrace area.
Analogous to the amphitheater at Wupatki, the Juniper Terrace site also has ceremonial structures that are located within the community. However, again like Wupatki, the ball court is situated well away from the pueblo.
Sitting on the embankment of the ball court at Juniper Terrace, it was trenched in 1936 by John McGregor, along with several others in the Flagstaff area. He was thus able to show that the morphology of the courts here are much the same as those in southern Arizona, where Emil Haury had only just defined the idea of ball courts in 1935. The ceramics found here in this court also indicate that the Juniper Terrace court is contemporaneous with the one at Wupatki, dating then in the late 1100s, and thus being among the latest of the ball courts that we know in this area.
Juniper Terrace is one of several villages in the area that were built defensively and that also are associated with a ball court. Other sites include Sacred Mountain in the Verde Valley, where the village was located on the hilltop and the ball court was built far below, and Ridge Ruin east of Flagstaff, a Sinawa site that was built in a similar layout. According to Wilcox, these ball courts could have provided a peaceful context for interaction among these different neighboring groups where exchanges could take place. At Eldon Pueblo, a Sinawa site located near Flagstaff within a day's foot travel of Wupatki, archaeological discoveries support the idea that exchange and even long-distance trade was taking place during the Eldon phase, which dated from about AD 1150 to 1225, the same age as Wupatki. An ongoing excavation of this Sinawan village, directed by Coconino Forest archaeologist Peter Pillis, has yielded clues about the extent of interaction and exchange between cultures.
Well, from the various beginnings of Sinawa, we see a lot of trade pottery from other cultures, like the Hohokam to the south, the Kayenta to the north, and now by Eldon phase, we see expansions of that to the north and east. We find pottery from the Winslow people and from folks living in the White Mountains area. But some of the more exciting artifacts are the shells, which indicate trade with the Pacific coast and the Gulf of California area, and also things like a copper bell and a macaw skeleton, indicating trade with the peoples of northern Mexico.
Archaeologically, it appears that an involved exchange system was occurring in this area that possibly revolved around the games in the ball court. Wilcox goes further to suggest that Wupatki may in fact have functioned as a geographic gateway for long-distance exchange between the Hohokam culture to the south and cultures to the east of Wupatki, specifically the Chacoan culture. Chaco Canyon was considered to be one of the largest and most politically powerful centers in the Southwest around the 10 and 1100s. Pueblo Bonito was at the center of the Chacoan system that spread over hundreds of miles and included many outlying villages built around public buildings called great houses. Although some scholars believe that Chaco was dying back by the time Wupatki came to power, Wilcox argues that both existed together.
This is Great Kiva A, which Neil Judd excavated in the 1920s. He found 17 floors in this structure, which suggests it was used for quite a long time. Tree ring dating from Pueblo Bonito suggests it wasn't built to begin with until after 1085, and it could have lasted as much as 100 years then. And if so, it's one of the pieces of evidence that suggests that Wupatki and Pueblo Bonito were contemporary in the late 1100s. And that there could then have been a connection between these two centers at that time. Pueblo Bonito began as a large arc-shaped structure built initially in the 800s, late 800s. It then grew into a large D-shaped structure and large building programs in the 1040s and the 1070s and 1080s. And in the central part, the oldest part, though, of Pueblo Bonito, where many valuables were found by archaeologists digging here in the 1890s, turquoise and shell and cotton textiles. And in two of the rooms, macaws had been kept, and the guano of these birds was found on the floor of these rooms, as well as burials of the birds. And it suggests that they were brought up from Mexico to Pueblo Bonito here, and then could have been dispersed from here as valuable ritual goods and political gifts to other areas within the Chacoan network, including Wupatki, way to the west.
During the excavation work at Wupatki, 41 macaw skeletons were found in the ruins, more than any other site in the American Southwest. Because macaws have rarely been found in Hohokam sites to the south, Wilcox suggests that these ritual items were reaching Wupatki via Chaco Canyon. Wilcox also argues that the communities at Wupatki and Chaco Canyon shared certain ethnic and cultural similarities, including ceremonial and political conceptions. Likewise, the distinctive stone masonry of later Chacoan architecture bears a significant resemblance to that of Wupatki. However, Chaco Canyon architecture did not include ball courts.
Well, it turns out that here in the Flagstaff area, the site of Wupatki has many Chacoan connections, many relationships that point toward its being a part somehow of this Chacoan system. The Wupatki Pueblo is like a great house in its architecture in many respects, but perhaps not all. There is a small dispersed community of small houses around it. It does have a circular feature of the bench, which is today called an amphitheater, but it's similar to a great kiva, though it's unroofed. But then, too, Wupatki uniquely has a ball court, the northernmost of the ball courts, that though, is made of sandstone architecture, and so it's different from any other Hohokam court then in the way it's constructed. And so it seemed like it began to dawn on me that it may have acted as a connector between the Hohokam regional system of the ball court network on the one hand and the Chacoan system of great houses on the other. And it then is striking that at Wupatki, the kind of valuables that we know archaeologically from each of these two large systems are present at Wupatki, both Hohokam valuables and Chacoan valuables. And so I began then to think about Wupatki in a new way as a nexus that may have connected these systems at least for a period of time.
During the 500 years that they existed, the meaning of southwestern ball courts appears to have evolved, taking on different significance over time. In his examination of ancient Southwest cultures, Dr. Wilcox continues to develop his models and to expand his theories about the dynamics that existed between different ethnic groups, while at the same time holding to the idea that ball courts served a significant purpose. Beginning with a strong religious association to the games played, the courts were at first an integral part of Hohokam culture. He further concludes that as the ball court feature was adopted by other ethnic groups, its purpose was significantly altered to that of cultivating exchange between diverse groups. If it is true that Wupatki was an outlying great house connected to the great Chacoan system to the east, did the Wupatkians in fact use the ball court as a way of establishing regular contact with the Sanawans and Kohonina people in the Flagstaff area? And with the Hohokam people in the south, while maintaining connections with the Chacoans to the east? As we continue to learn more about these societies and southwestern archaeology in general, we may someday have more answers about the role of these features called ball courts.